Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today.
Training is now almost an outdated concept. We're on that journey from training to learning. In the old days, discipline was all about shouting and screaming at people and standing to attention and saluting and things like that. But, it's gone beyond that. And I think, and quite rightly so, because obviously, shouting, screaming at people doesn't work in today's environment. People don't put up with it. And quite rightly so, because what's the value add of shouting, screaming at someone? I think the key thing around discipline is the ability to follow instructions and orders when it counts. The Fire Service College was so well established that it was almost operating to a small degree in isolation. And the problem always is when you do that is you start thinking you know more than what your customers know. And that's where you start disconnecting with your target audience. So you're set in a way of doing things because you perceive them to be the best way of doing them. We've got to understand what the challenges are that our customers are facing, and all of a sudden bringing that customer centricity back into play. There's a limited pool of highly experienced people. However, they're out there. And I think if you can give them the right, I call it value proposition, the ability to run their departments, the ability to make decisions, the ability to select their teams. Yes, of course, it's got to be part of the overarching strategy, and we've got to calibrate and balance things sometimes. But that's what leadership is all about. I don't pretend to be a firefighter ever. So when I go to the front line, I don't have a fake uniform or what some people might do, so I'm a civilian, so to speak, and that's how I behave.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. Dominik, welcome to the podcast, sir. How are you?
Very good, Pete. Good to be with you. Looking forward to our session.
There's a variety of things I want to get into our conversation about today, but I'd love by starting with a little bit of context around sort of who you are, the background of your career, and the role you do now, if we can.
Of course, absolutely. So I joined the Fire Service College just over 3 years ago, in the summer of 2020, in the middle of COVID, and very much on sort of a transformational remit, coming in, assess where we were at that stage, and then come up with a plan on how we want to take the college forward into the future. And probably my background is quite relevant to that. So prior to joining the Fire Service College, I worked for a big education company called Pearson. I ran 7 technical and vocational colleges for them, predominantly in the Middle East, but obviously also very closely involved in the UK FE sector. And prior to that, I worked for a big outsourcing company called Serco. I did strategy for their defense business, transformed their Germany business, and also ran their regulated aviation business. And that's quite, sort of a link back to my original background, which was in civil aviation. After university,
Really?
I did all sorts of things, running airport operations, aircraft leasing, and you name it. So that's how I started off, and then went into the more corporate world, and very much always with a sort of a transformation focus, which seems to be my background. And it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, of course, you always get tagged as a transformation person, so you always get tapped on the shoulder for those, whilst obviously it's also very, very nice to be able to see the transformation through into business as usual. And I think that's where the Fire Service College is really great in terms of my journey, because we've done the main transformation part is still ongoing, but we are now much more akin to business as usual, and it's actually quite nice to see.
A lot of the heavy lifting appears to have been over the last few years, or maybe 5 or so years, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think COVID obviously made life quite difficult. So I can't praise the team more highly than that. The way they handled that situation. Because by the time I arrived, the college was fully reopened. Of course, we had one-way systems, everything was segregated, learning bubbles, you name it. I mean, it was quite surreal now thinking about it. Now we're back to being in as a fully operational college, and incredibly busy as well. I mean, we grew 28% year on year. We've got about 15,000 people come through our front gates, the highest number ever, certainly since Capita took over in 2013, but probably since the 90s, to be honest. So having gone from this incredibly restrictive sort of environment with COVID this, COVID that, into an environment which is now back to really vibrant, people engaging with each other, is absolutely fascinating. But the team did an outstanding job. So when I arrived, that made my life much easier because I could focus in straight away on how to move the college forward rather than having to deal with the day-to-day aspects of having that COVID regime in place.
Transformation is like one of those interchangeable words from change. I think there's like a cultural aversion to change, isn't it? But I always say to people that change is expected, change is natural, change is growth, is evolution, is development, is transformation, however you want to term it. In a past life, I was a CI lead, so it's continuous improvement. So we did, I'm sure you've probably done all the courses, Six Sigma and Lean and Kaizen and large scale problem solving and all that sort of stuff. And there was an aversion, like when teams would be told that we'd be getting dropped in to see them because we'd be trying to help with an efficiency or a behavioural change or waste reduction or whatever it might be. But I always say firefighters don't like the way things are and they don't like change, which isn't true, but it's just one of those funny sector jokes people like to say. But change is necessary because when we actually look at the role, and I know this is only actually a micro part of what the conversation we're going to be having today, the emergency services, first responder communities, but also military, I've been going through such colossal changes over the last couple of decades. The role that we do, the diversification of it, the expansion of the different roles and aspects and skill sets. It's huge, really, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, we at the Fire Service College, we got to be fully involved in that, and I think the problem traditionally has been that the Fire Service College was so well established that it was almost operating to a small degree in isolation. And the problem always is when you do that is you start thinking you know more than what your customers know, and that's where you start disconnecting with your target audience. So you're set in a way of doing things because you perceive them to be the best way of doing them. But
it's the way it's always done.
Exactly. But the environment around you is moving on. And I think the biggest change that I was able to bring to the Fire Service College is to basically turn that around and say, look, we've got to start listening to our customers. We've got to understand what the challenges are that our customers are facing. What does the wider environment look like? And all of a sudden bringing that customer centricity back into play. And that's twofold. One is, of course, you've got decision makers who decide, what courses to procure, so to speak. And that could be either, in the chain of command within a fire service, or it could be a local authority procurement officer who doesn't really know that much about fire. But also, of course, is the wider cultural aspect. And that is, really, really important. So when we look at recruits coming into the fire service nowadays, their expectations are fundamentally different than those recruits might have had 10, 20 years ago. And we got to make sure we respond to that, because if we continue...
And also they're coming into something different. It's like the people have changed and the thing has changed. So when people say things like, oh, you don't need to reinvent the wheel, the wheel has completely changed its shape and the people rolling the wheel have changed as well. Life has changed, culture has changed.
It absolutely has, and especially the involvement of technology. technology within the fire service itself. If I look, I mean, I'm sort of double-headed. I run the Fire Service College, but also Capita Fire and Rescue, which delivers the Defence Fire and Rescue project. So that's the outsourcing of the MOD's, civilian firefighting capability. But all,
We had James Mullins from Flame. Do you know
yes,
James?
absolutely, yeah.
I'm sure you know. You've got a couple. Yeah, we had him on the podcast yesterday. Fascinating. Oh, mate, the stuff that they're doing there. And they said they had a couple of units at the college and they'd been well received and working with the team and stuff like this. Things like that. And again, the romantics of the world will have an aversion to any sort of developments in technology. But yeah, some of those things, I know that's only one very small example, but it's very fascinating.
No, it is. I mean, we spent about 90 million pounds on transforming defence fire. 138 brand new vehicles, the latest stage appliances, but also brand new PPE, technology to aid maintenance of competence, but also things like virtual reality and augmented reality training solutions. It's a very different way of approaching training, and I think equally, of course, is training is now almost an outdated concept. We are on that journey from training to learning, and basically, rather than it's just chalk and talk as it might have been, we are conveying a piece of information. We expect you to memorize that piece of information, and then when you get assessed, you read it back to us, basically.
I think that's a very difficult shift for people who historically, again, it would just be Pete Wakefield's sign off. Oh, I think Dominik's good enough. But now, for far better, because people used to spend a career in the fire service or a career in the military, come out with no formal qualification. Whereas what people need to, and I remember one of our previous guests, the head of SFJ Awards, the lady's name escapes me. That is horrific of me. Anyway, she said we really need to remind ourselves that we're an adult education now. This is not, we're not just playing about with people and saying, oh, I think they're there or thereabouts to look like a good egg to me. The world of accreditation and adult education has been a very difficult transition for a lot of people in this sector, understanding the need for an equal and fair and transparent assessment and all that sort of jazz. But it really does empower and give people a lot more credibility in the incredible work that they've been doing because they are getting official, and I know the college, you get accreditations and certificates for all of the courses.
Absolutely. Everything we do is accredited, and that's on purpose because it does basically provide a quality assurance framework around everything we do.
Stops it being the Wild West,
it does,
basically.
Exactly. And I mean, if traditionally the way recruitment, for instructors worked as follows, you spend many years in the fire service, and then at some stage you would get seconded to the fire service college, and you were seconded basically at the behest of your service. Some individuals volunteered, others were told to go, and of course that was a good concept because it worked really well. Everything the fire service college delivered was somewhat provided for by the sector, whether it was appliances on loan or secondment, whether it was people on secondment, but that was always very much then operating in an environment that the people had been used to, bringing in their experiences from different services, and there's a lot of good in that, and it was a very successful.
It did stink of nepotism a little bit sometimes as well, though. It was a little bit my mate's mate, and I know this was long before your time, but it was a little bit of that. And that's Pete Wakefield's personal opinion, because I know that's been a tough transition for people to get away, because sometimes that happens to the detriment of students as well, historically.
Yeah, I mean, our focus is on absolutely professionalizing everything. So our instructors are highly professional. They all have to have a teaching qualification nowadays. So just having technical competence is not good enough. You've got to be able to convey and engage with learners in the right way. We do, have mandatory CPD, that continuous professional development approach. And also very importantly, of course, is that the management structure is reflective of that. So the management team does predominantly come out of the education sector, because that's where their expertise is, and then working with SMEs who are very, very experienced, obviously bringing in the subject matter expertise, but also making sure it does all happen within a modern, advanced learning framework. And that obviously then is very beneficial for learners, because what we are making sure is that the knowledge is conveyed in an environment that they are getting used to. So, example, we're talking about bite-sized learning, the TikTok generation. If you can't convey a point within 5 seconds, you have lost the learner. So putting lots of stuff on a PowerPoint slide or on a whiteboard doesn't work any longer. It's got to be interactive. You've got to enable people to work and learn at different paces. So that's where technology comes in. Everybody having a handheld device and being able to do, learning, not necessarily their pleasure, but in a more flexible way, because some people pick things up more quickly than others. Some people are more adept at absorbing information, via theory, whereas others are more adapted, absorbing information via practical elements. So it's trying.
I think historically it always used to attract kinesthetic learners to the sector, but now we are seeing, for the better, a more neurodiverse set of individuals coming into, staying in, and developing in the fire and rescue service. So we need to get down off our high horse a little bit and have the humility, as you're alluding to there, to deliver this information in different ways. Because historically, others would just say, "Oh, you know what? Dominik's just not getting it. He's just not a good egg. He's just not getting it." Well, it's like a relationship, isn't it? Is it how you're hearing it or how I'm saying it? Because I'm sure Sally or James or whoever would say it a little bit different than maybe Dominik would get it, or it's the way in which we're translating that information.
Absolutely, and also very importantly, all the learners that come to the fire service college are capable of doing the job because they've been selected by their respective employers, i.e. the fire and rescue services. We don't get involved in that. The students come to us, after all the initial selection has taken place. So, we know when they come through our door, they have passed the assessment hurdles that the individual services have put forward. So our job is to make sure they all get successfully through the course. Obviously, we've got to deliver the learning outcomes. That is absolutely critical. So, inevitably, there is the odd learner that is struggling to achieve those. Clearly, we'll work with the service to help them along the journey. Most of them do get back on track ultimately and successfully pass out and then continue their learning journey with the respective services. Unfortunately, there's the odd person that might not make it on the first go. Some of them do come back subsequently and do very well because they had a chance to reflect and adjust maybe on how they go about things. But unfortunately, there's the odd one here and there that unfortunately does drop out for good. But that's part of the learning journey as well. If you realize that you're not suited for that job or there's certain aspect of the job that don't fit people's expectations, it's much better to make that decision early on rather than plow on and then ultimately fail further down the line.
I think that's a misservice. Sometimes when people go, anyone can join. Yes, anyone can, as in from any background, from any origin. But I'm not saying everyone can do it. And I couldn't be a high-level accountant.
Yeah.
My mum was. I would struggle. My mind doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I couldn't be a firefighter. I don't like working at heights. It is a prerequisite, or being able to work in very confined spaces. So you've got to have a certain ability to do that. That's true for any job. And as you rightly said, we can't all be accountants or this or that. But the thing is, the fire service it is a good employer, and it's good to see much more diversity coming into the training environment. We certainly see far more female recruits arriving at the fire service college, which is long overdue and something we really welcome. I think there's really still a big challenge around ethnic diversity, and hopefully, and I know my colleagues in the individual fire and rescue services are working incredibly hard in addressing those particular aspects, because we find having a diverse learning environment actually enhances learning outcomes. Having
100%.
particularly a larger proportion of female recruits now, I think it provides an incentive.
Well, I think the women you guys do with women in the fire service, 3 or 4 years, probably more. You've ran it at the college now. I love it. I go every year, and my role there seems to grow every year. I think next year, myself, Danny, and Chrissy, and this may be news to you. I don't know. This is people in different department of the college, but going to be doing our first fitness style event to help people engage. I think that's going to be, no, for some people they'll roll their eyes. It's not all about that, but it's just another way in which the college is expanding the role of that day, because there always has been a tremendous amount of professional development in those days, and really a wonderful focus on the soft skills as well, which is something we kind of alluded to earlier, which I think is something that's often overlooked. We're very romantic about the hard skills in first responders. Can you do the thing? Yeah, and you do need to do the thing. But actually the biggest challenges that we're facing in the UK now is not can we do the thing. It tends to be cultural challenges and things like that we're facing, which for me, in my personal opinion, sits in soft skills.
It absolutely does, and there's a lot, much more emphasis on that. I think until recently, the emphasis was absolutely on purely technical competence, and that's the thing that was assessed. That's the thing you learned. Is the drills, and I think that the drills still have got a place, because it's important to build up some muscle memory. You go into an incident, you got to be able to respond. And that is critical. But you also got to be able to respond with the aftermath. So, going in and tackling a fire or extracting someone from a building, that's a very technical skill set. But then what you do with the individual that you have extracted from the building, you can't just dump them on the side of the road. So there's this ongoing engagement as well, but also the ability to make decisions as you go along. And this is not about everybody doing their own thing. That's why you've got standard operating procedures and all those sort of things. They're really, really important. That's for health and safety purposes, that's for well-being purposes, you name it. So, you can't just willy-nilly do things the way you want to do them. But sometimes it is important that if you see something that obviously needs to be done differently, to have the ability to engage. And I think that the two major incidents in more recent history, Cranfell and Manchester, of course, have highlighted a lot of those sort of aspects. Is like, yes, you've got to have a standard approach, but sometimes you've got to have the agility and the ability, to respond to the situation in a slightly different way. And if I look the way incident command and leadership has evolved, certainly over the last few years, it's very, very different than to what it used to be. And I think so it's bringing all those things together is really, really important. So I suspect someone who might have gone through a recruit course at the Fire Service College 20 years ago and would come onto a recruit course now would be completely lost, because it's something completely different. Yes, they will recognize the core skills. They will always be there. You got to, BA this and everything else. There's no question about it. And the technical competence is incredibly important. But also you've got to make sure that people can go beyond that, because also people approach the fire service differently. So someone who might have joined the fire service 20, 30, 40 years ago, they would join at 18. And their expectation was to be in the fire service for the rest of their life, basically. And those days are gone. People who join professions nowadays, in any profession, unless you're a doctor or something like that, I think you're very much predetermined where you go. But generally speaking, people join with like a 3 to 5 year horizon, and then they revisit what they might want to do. So it's a completely different.
I keep jumping around in the same sector. I change jobs about every year and a half, 2 years, which I'm sure is the frustration of my brigade or service. But I'm very much like that. And people begrudge that these days, and I think it's just a change in the time. You yourself, again, in the sort of circles and the level of professionalism you work at, people will be there and they'll have their own personal goals for a certain number of years. But it's okay to move on, because also, I even say this as a micro example when people talk about being in services, and we'll jump away from this conversation in a minute because something else I want to ask you. But people that stay on a station or in a service, they stay at the same place for 10 years. I also think there's an egotism to that, to assume that there's not also fascinating people working over there in a different department, in a different station, in a different business, in a different sector. Do you know what I mean? And that brings back with it, so, and I perhaps even again use the secondment aspect that used to be so prevalent in the fire service college. That ability for people to go away, take an experience, and come back with a diverse set of thinking, that neurodiversity, for want of a better description, and ways to solve problems. I think that was an incredibly valuable thing that I think we do need to lean more into. And I know we'll come on to talking about that in a little bit. I want to zoom out, if we could, because I'm historically terrible at doing this. I always do this. I get so deep into something that's fascinating to me, but I make the assumption that everybody knows exactly we're talking about. So I'd love to just give you, if you could, please, I know it's long before your time, give us a bit of an understanding for the holistically looking at the Fire Service College, because I believe it started in 1959.
Yeah, so basically, it was a Wellington bomber training airfield during World War II. Survived a little bit after World War II, and then yes, indeed, in 1959, it transferred from the RAF to the Home Office. And the idea was to set up a technical college. The concept was two colleges. It was like a leadership-focused college, a bit like Sandhurst in the military, and then Moreton-in-Marsh to become a technical college. And a lot of work was done around that. And then in 1974, Her late Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II formally opened the college. So almost 50 years ago. So next year is our 50th anniversary, based on that particular date. So which we're looking forward to, and we'll be having lots of events planned and so forth. And then very much it was run by government, and then of course at that stage, it was mandated. You had to go there. Fire and Rescue Service had to second, personnel, had to second equipment, and then everybody literally had to go through the Fire Service College. So you talk to anybody who's got 20 plus years or whatever experience in experience, they all will have been at the Fire Service College at various stages throughout their career. And then, of course, the world started to change in sort of the 1990s and the early 2000s. Funding constraints, sort of the first boom of outsourcing, but also government sort of thought, well, this is all incredibly expensive to run. So they came up with those trading funds, which basically government-owned entities, but run at arm's length. So they had all chief execs and their own sort of management teams and independent boards overseeing them. And then, of course, into the early 2000s and to the mid 2000s, money was getting tighter and tighter. So the decision was made to sell the Fire Service College, and Capita happened to buy it in 2013 and then take control over it. At that stage, I think that the college was somewhat struggling, and it's twofold. So one is the liberalisation of the training market, so to speak. People were no longer compelled to go to the Fire Service College, because as the government was setting up trading funds centrally, local authorities were setting up trading funds as well. So they all thought, well, we all have training facilities, so why don't we commercially exploit them? So all of a sudden, everybody was setting up their own fire training businesses, competing for business. But obviously, it's quite difficult to run.
Why did they do that? And I know it's hard to speak because
it
wasn't your job and stuff like that. But
it's like presumed revenue generation that then could be reinvested by the local authority in other things. So this was like, making up maybe some of the central government funding gaps and things like that. And if you look at it,
because they used to be given tokens of some form, didn't they? So they could send, that they would redeem those tokens and send people to the college.
There were different models. It also depends how different services are funded. As you know, a lot of the services have different funding models and everything else.
Astonishes me how different it is.
Scotland got their own thing as well, and you name it. So, but the reality basically is, all of a sudden everybody started doing their own thing, and of course that also meant, of course, a decline in the Fire Service College, because of course you had less volumes. Nobody was mandated any longer. The Fire Service College had to be commercially viable. So all of a sudden, you actually had to account for the cost of running the site and the revenue that was coming in. So it was getting to a point really where I think that the college was really, really suffering, and so the decision then was more or less, look, what do we do with this site in Moreton-in-Marsh? So privatisation was decided the way forward, and so Capita was successful in acquiring the college, as I said.
Up until that point, was it solely fire services that were being trained there? Because I know, and again, it's the 5 Hours podcast, but we speak to military personnel, we speak to police officers, paramedics, and I don't know if it's just today, and I wonder if you could give some context around how far back, because the diversity of training that happens there Has that always been the case? Because it's used
Oh,
tremendously.
it's much
And I
more
know we're jumping
diverse
all
than
over the
it
place
probably
here,
ever
but
has been. And again, obviously, I wasn't
yeah,
around in the early days, but of course, absolutely, the focus was on fire. Yes, there was always a degree of interoperability, especially when you're doing some command leadership. Inevitably, it does touch other blue light services. But if I look at the college now, I mean, it is still predominantly fire. I mean, I'd say probably about 80%.
is it really?
And that's a combination of
Okay.
local authority and, of course, we now host the Defence Fire Training Unit, which is a joint venture between the Fire Service College, the RAF, Defence Fire and Rescue, and Capita Fire and Rescue.
That was a great decision, that was.
I mean,
Because I think they struggle, not struggle, that's harsh, in my very limited understanding, they struggle to train their own individuals to a similar level because they haven't got as many subject matter experts because it's not the core part of their business, similar with airports and stuff like that. And this is just my own personal opinion.
well, I
Please
think
correct me
the
if I'm
challenge
wrong.
for the RAF was that RAF Manston, where defence fire training took place, it was aging infrastructure, and it's incredibly expensive to provide and maintain the sort of infrastructure you need. So as part of the DFRP contract, that new training establishment was established, and very importantly, of course, it is a phase two training establishment. So there's military discipline and rigor around it, but also bringing in the best from both worlds, basically. So we're RAF instructors and civilian instructors working side by side. And of course, what we were able to do is provide brand new infrastructure. So you look at the Defence Fire Station, state of the art, a brand new multi-purpose aviation rig, which is not just state of the art, it's actually unique in the UK.
Is that the one on the right behind all the fences? Is that that one? Because there's a couple of fire stations on the site,
Yeah,
isn't there?
so
Or am I just
the
am I
one on the
making that up? I think there's two
yeah,
fire
so the
stations
one
on
is
the
a
site, isn't
civilian fire station. So if you're on a firefighter
there?
development program, you'll be on that side for that part of the course, and then if you're in the
Yeah.
military, you're on the other side in there.
I've not been to that
No,
one
you,
yet.
you should.
I'm gonna have to go and have a
It's
look
a
at
brand
some
new
point. I bet it's
facility.
wonderful.
It's
Yeah,
state of the art because obviously it was purposely built for
yeah,
DFTU. And the reason why they're separate is because, of course, there's a duty of care and safeguarding and welfare for phase two
yeah,
recruits. So it's important that the military provides that environment that's safe and secure for their trainees.
yeah,
And equally, of course, there are differences. It's a military environment, there's military discipline,
yeah,
and things like that. I'm not saying
yeah.
that civilian firefighters are not disciplined. I mean, they're probably some of the most disciplined civilians
They're not as disciplined.
well,
I'm a bit romantic. Sometimes I'm one of them. I always say people hear discipline and they think it comes with lots of negative connotations. I always say there's freedom in discipline, and I know people struggle with that sometimes. What I mean by it is, if you're a bit more disciplined on yourself, life is going to be less disciplined on you. I'm sure you're a very disciplined individual. I'm sure the way you perhaps treat yourself and the expectations that Dominik holds himself to would probably seem quite harsh to some people. I always say, irrespective of how mean I might seem to my kids at times, I hold myself to a much higher standard than I ever do to them. So I always find if you're harder on yourself, life is a little bit easier on you. So I do like an aspect of discipline because it's always harsh if someone has to impose discipline upon you. When the services and the military and the RAF are fantastic at it, there's more of an aspect of self-discipline that you're trying to grow within someone, isn't it? Because no one knows what Dominik's doing on his days off or when he's working from home. That's all down to your own self-discipline, that you are going to do the thing you said you were going to do.
exactly.
And I want us to continue to encourage that. But it is, people hear discipline, and I know, sorry for going down that rabbit hole, people have a lot of negative connotations to it.
They do, and I think if we're very clear, discipline is very different nowadays. I mean, in the old days, discipline was all about shouting and screaming at people and standing to attention and saluting and things like that. I mean, clearly there's saluting and saying to attention is still a thing in the military, but it's gone beyond that, and I think, and quite rightly so, because obviously shouting, screaming at people doesn't work in today's environment. People don't put up with it, and quite rightly so, because what's the value add of shouting and screaming at someone? I think the key thing around discipline is the ability to follow instructions and orders when it counts. So if you're in an incident and situation, it's not a debate. It's not like there's no time to politely request someone to do something and for that person potentially to talk back and say no, I don't fancy doing it that way. So that is what discipline is about. Discipline is about doing things that you need to be doing at the right time and without any delay.
How challenging do you find that when you're recruiting people for businesses in general? I have found that, having run my own businesses, and also now when we're getting new people joining the emergency services, it's very hard to find good people sometimes who have self-discipline, because again, you don't imposing discipline on someone is a very difficult thing to do. When you are working in these very high levels of organizations, interacting with other senior leaders and trying to pick people to, uphold some very challenging tasks and positions, is it gotten easier? Has it gotten harder when you're looking for great people in the world now?
It's gotten much harder, I would argue.
Okay, I agree it has as well, but I didn't want to put those words in your mouth.
It is, and I think it's I think especially where the labour market is at the moment, where I think people are either reluctant to move or got unrealistic expectations sometimes. So.
Well, like I want to work one day a week.
Yeah, and I think that
is that not enough?
Part and parcel of the problem. So obviously there's a limited pool of highly experienced people. However, they're out there, and I think if you can give them the right, I call it value proposition, the ability to run their departments, the ability to make decisions, the ability
give them
to select
autonomy,
their
trust
teams.
them.
And I'm very privileged. I mean, I've got an outstanding director of learning and transformation in Claire Mowbray, who's incredibly experienced. And she runs the whole learning function, and that's what I've hired her for. She knows much more about all of that than I ever will be. So, so I've got to give her, the freedom to do the things that she needs to do. Yes, of course, it's got to be part of the overarching strategy, and we've got to calibrate and balance things sometimes. But that's what leadership is all about. And then it's then her prerogative to build up her high-performing team, which she has done with some exceptionally talented people. And then very importantly, develop those teams, engage with those teams. And that way, I think you will be able to attract good people. And they will make a real difference, and that's also then reflected in terms of feedback from customers on how our learning is moving in the right direction, and how it has changed for the better, and all those sort of things. The other challenge, of course, is recruiting at entry level, and that is incredibly challenging at the moment. So we at the college ourselves, but also through all of our suppliers, so we work with a lot of partners to provide, let's say, the soft FM services, hard FM services. So actually the majority of people actually work at the college. They're probably not even employed directly by the college. They work for outsourced service providers. So we focus in on the expertise on the learning side, but letting the experts do the cleaning and catering and then things like that. So we all collectively are struggling to get young people into doing not necessarily always the nicest type of jobs, working in the kitchen.
I think it's an important character calibration as well, though, and it gives you some good understanding of work life. Like, I don't know what your upbringing was like, but my dad ran a building firm. I was 10 years old on work sites filling skips and all that sort of jazz, which I wouldn't necessarily encourage. And people will say that's abusive labour and all this sort of stuff. But whether it's working on a market, I worked in fast-moving consumer good factories, and I worked in a bar, and I worked in a restaurant, and I had these jobs. I didn't want to do them forever, and there's very high turnover in the young labour workforce, and it probably always will be, because they then find their feet in whatever they want to do in life. But it seems to just have been an aversion completely from interacting with these jobs.
And like yourself, I mean, yes, I've been to university, but my very first job was right at the bottom in the aviation industry, but it was the best grounding I've ever had, in terms of engaging with the front line, dealing with baggage handlers and people like that, who don't take any nonsense and certainly don't take any instructions. So, having to work through all of this is exciting, and I didn't do that forever, obviously, so you gradually then move upwards and do other things. But, for me, I always encourage people, get as much, hands-on practical experience, because you will just put you up so much better for life later on. But no, it's a real struggle to get youngsters in. And then we reach out to local sixth form colleges and things like that to say, look, we're actively recruiting. And they're all saying, oh, we've got all these youngsters who can't find jobs. And we said, look, come to us. It may be not your dream job, but it will get you going. It will give you a regular paycheck.
And also, you don't know what's there. I always say, it's like walking to the end of a building to look around the corner. Look, you don't really know what's here until you come. So until you've gotten to there, and then you see everything, and you go, "Oh my God! Wow, look at these RF people! Look at these police, there's fire." So, and then you start learning what else is possible for you in life.
Let's don't forget, we got some people at the college who are now instructors, who started off in support roles, who were retained firefighters, on-call firefighters, got that experience, working at the college, gradually building up the skill set. And then moving into other roles, and promoting from within is always our preferred approach wherever we can. And the beauty nowadays is with apprenticeships and everything else, there's a lot of tools available. So so it doesn't necessarily mean just because you haven't got the right learning prerequisites that you can't actually then attain additional knowledge in order to move into different roles. I mean, especially nowadays, the apprenticeship scheme. I mean, everybody just thinks apprenticeship is like you go and make coffee and do boring things. There's some really exciting opportunities, and they go all the way up to degree level. So it's very different.
We've seen a real resurgence in the last 10 years or so. I'd probably maybe say 15 years of apprenticeships. We had a conversation with someone specifically around apprenticeships because people didn't really understand what they were. They remember city and guilds, and they remember learning to be a plumber or getting an apprenticeship, but that was only one variation of it. Apprenticeships were set up, the government levy, and you'll know far about this than I will, so I'll fumble my way through it, but they're set up for us to sustain the skill sets within the UK economy, for want of a better description. And there's an expanding, round of things that you can take those apprenticeships in. You can actually go on the website and have a look at all the different apprenticeships you could do and what organisations will get support from the government, because you can draw down from the levy and it's a different amount depending on the skill set.
Absolutely. I mean, all big organisations pay the levy. So, I mean, it's in our interest to get people.
You've got to pay it anyway.
Exactly,
So it's like you might as well use it.
Back, and at the same time you build up the skills and everything else. I think in the UK there's still this conundrum that, of course, successive governments have always pushed university this, university that, moving the polytechnics into university status and things like that, rather than building up a proper alternative. I know that more recently there has been more emphasis on that, but we're nowhere near yet as advanced as some of the continental European countries, and in that particular respect, Germany, for example.
I think we shot ourselves in the foot a little bit there by accident, because now people, not everyone, but I'm generalising here as we have to in conversations like this, but some people look down on apprenticeships. So, you echoed back earlier about the diversity of people coming into the sector in terms of whether it be background, ethnicity, religion, whatever. If you said to someone in those groups, and this is my words, not yours, go and do an apprenticeship, some people consider that a blue-collar job. Why do I want to go and be an apprentice? I want my son or daughter to get a degree. They're going to be a lawyer, Dominik. They're not going to be a knuckle-dragging firefighter or, work in the military and wear a uniform. And that's a bit like, I think we've accidentally created that beast a little bit.
We have, but I think the reality is now sinking in, because we get lots of graduates from very prestigious universities who are struggling to find their way and in the real world, so to speak. And I think nowadays a lot of organisations, whether it's the military, fire service, most of the things we do are now transferable qualifications.
Yes.
Literally every recruit that comes into the fire service nowadays is an apprentice. It's a 2-year program. We do the first 8 weeks at the fire service college, but there's still an ongoing process.
Do you just do it? Do you do an 8 and a 12, or is it just an 8?
So the 8 one is the standard FFTP. The longer one is when you do the ARF conversion. So that's the aviation fire element. Right, that's the difference between the two. So, but just because you leave the fire service college doesn't mean that your training is over. So, your practical training continues at within your respective service, but also, of course, the apprenticeship, coaching, mentoring element, that is a 2-year program. So so you still got to maintain your portfolios and all these sort of things. So at the end of the 2 years, that's when you've got your.
Those talent coaches, they're provided through the college as well as part of the whole package, am I right in saying that, or is that a
So
different
it's a slightly different
arm
part
to
of
the
Capita.
organisation?
That's our colleagues and
Okay.
skills and learning provide that, but it's fully integrated. So it's an
Yes.
end-to-end, very seamless process for both the employers and the learners. And obviously the practical element at the fire service college is a key component, but you will maintain your learning portfolio throughout that apprenticeship period. And that provides individuals with a very valuable skill set, because also very importantly is, if people like yourself move between different services and everything else, you've got a portfolio to take with you. You've got evidence.
Yes, something that's
Exactly.
recognisable that they can go. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I can go and check this accreditation to a national body, and it holds
It
weight.
does. I know it's caused some headaches for some fire and rescue services, especially those surrounding London, because of course London has been recruiting very aggressively, as have other services. On the one hand, of course, having transferable qualifications is great, but I
Mhm.
do appreciate that some of my customers do feel the strain sometimes, and when it happens. But
Yeah.
saying that, of course, it's down to individual services, and I've got the same exactly in Capita Fire and Rescue. Is, of course, you've got to remain an attractive employer. You've got to think outside
Yes.
the box how you attract people in the first place, but equally how you
Mhm.
retain people. And I've got that at the
Mhm.
fire service college as well. Is retention?
Mhm.
It can be a challenge. I've got people coming up to me saying, "Look,
Mhm.
Dominic, I can get a better job down the road." And sometimes you've got no choice but to say,
Go on
"I'm
then.
afraid
You know
I
what I'm
can't pay you that."
saying?
But it's funny enough, A always keep saying to people is there's a different shade of green. The grass is not necessarily greener; it's a different shade of green.
No, it's a
And
different shade of
funnily
green. Yeah.
enough, a lot of people actually do come back, because the one thing which is really important at the fire service college is we look after our people. First of all, they're the most important
Mm.
asset that we've got, so we do have to look after them. But also, I think we're an organisation that is incredibly flexible and accommodating. Because everybody's got their own personal circumstances. We got people with young families. They need to deal with school situations, or taking them to doctor's appointments or whatever it is. So what we're trying to do is, yes, we've got to deliver obviously a high performing environment, because that's obviously what our learners are expecting and everything else. But within those parameters, we try to be as flexible as we possibly can be to support our colleagues. And so I think people do appreciate that. Yes, maybe the money might be slightly more next door,
Mhm.
but
But I also think about it like the military and also like places like Google. I know there are different ones for people to think about, but like it's a very much a package deal from my experiences with the college, because you get to the space for personal time. I'm talking on site now, space for professional development. There's space, there's accommodation, there's food, there's health and exercise. You're part of a very interesting thing. And like I say, the reason I use Google as an example, because they set their facilities up so people can be there without it being a stressful, debilitating environment. The college is quite a nice place to be.
yeah, and then equally, if, we take obviously health and safety incredibly seriously. So, all the work we're doing around, that part as well is making sure that our colleagues, are in a good environment, from a well-being perspective, being recognised for the hard work that they do. And I think that's really really important. So I think coming back to the transferable skills, you know,
Mm-hmm.
so transferable skills is a good thing, um, but unless you look after your people, the problem is you will start to suffer, because people will take those transferable skills and move on. So
And go
and
elsewhere.
and that's why I think it's also important to start focusing in on the sort of the continuous personal development element, which goes above and
Mm.
beyond the technical side of things. So obviously the fire service tradition has been always very very keen on maintenance of competence. I mean, absolutely critical. You've got
Mm.
to maintain your technical skill set, and then as you progress through the ranks, you've got to continue to build up and enhance and expand your technical
Mm.
skill set. I think nowadays there's the additional dimension of leadership, management skills,
Mm.
and things like that. So we are seeing a big shift now taking place, where there's much more emphasis on those additional
Mm.
skills on top of the technical. competencies and
I
things
think
like
they
that.
were assumed skills as problems in the past. They were assumed people would develop self-awareness, soft skills, assertiveness, ability to have difficult conversations, manage projects, whatever it might be. So we taught people the hard skills and everything else was a little bit assumed. Before we come away from it, I wanted to ask you about, we mentioned about being an attractive employer and being, encouraging top talent into our organisations. You've been doing a lot of work with the direct entry process at the college. We had Dawn Whitaker on the podcast, and she obviously is a big champion for it. She's got in my limited understanding, she's got a really great history in John Lewis and places like that. Help us understand, because we spoke before we came on about actually needing to develop a wider set of skills far beyond whatever your technical capacity is. Because I say, when I am lucky enough to sit in rooms full of people far more senior than myself, I wonder why I'm there sometimes, you're heading up a multi-million-pound organisation if you're running a big brigade or a big service, and you'll obviously know about this only too well. Try and help me sell, because I say this to people and they really struggle with it. Try and help me sell the benefits of things. And you don't run direct entry. It's not the college's baby. We're not trying to promote it, blah, blah, blah. Why is it important? Because you obviously do this as an external organisation anyway. You attract top talent with diverse backgrounds. Why?
So I mean, the why is very clear, because what you want is diversity in your organization, because diversity means you become a high performing organization, and what you've got to get is different skill sets as well. So because some of the skill sets are quite unique. So for example, you need a good finance director. What you want is someone who's incredibly good with numbers, and it's I mean, the challenge always is, and I always use the sales analogy. So I've seen that so many times, where a really, really good salesperson, achieving, exceeding all of their targets, being really happy and productive, and all of a sudden they get promoted to becoming sales directors, i.e. they've got to manage a team, and they fail
Yeah.
miserably, because they've never been prepared to lead teams. Just because they're a good salesperson themselves doesn't necessarily mean they are a great people leader at the same time.
Yeah.
And sometimes people shoot themselves in the foot doing that, without giving people the right training and support and everything else. So I think there is absolutely a case for natural in-house progression. You start off at a station, and then you become a crew manager, a watch manager, a station manager, and so forth. And that's good, because you've got to give people the opportunity to progress. I think the danger always is that you become too reliant on direct entry opportunities, where you bring in people from the outside. And I've been in organizations where there was too much emphasis on bringing people in from the outside. So you want to have a good mix between the
Okay.
two. But what you've got to do is, in order to enable your own people to succeed and to be fit for purpose when they get, to the more senior roles, is you've got to enable them along that journey. You've got to give them the ability to attain the skills that they ultimately need to be successful and effective in those roles. So just because you are a really good firefighter doesn't mean you're a really good people manager.
Yeah.
And the assumption is, well, you're a firefighter, you must be good at managing people because you're part of a team and you learn all those skills. But there's a very
Do you know?
big
Do you know Mars, the big
yeah.
company Mars? I used to work for Mars, and we had two very different roles. It was B1s, B3, B7s, and all that. And then I forget the other letter. But basically, you couldn't just transition sideways from an operational role into an office-based role, because it was a very different skill set. Like you say, you would have heads of logistics or head of research and development, and they would work either on their own or in teams of two, and they would be on 70, 80 grand a year. But someone in the factory on the same amount, a shift leader or whatever, managing 50, 60 people, it's a different set of skills. And I've seen this in government sometimes. They just sideways move someone, and you're like, that's a whole different skill set.
It is, but with the right support and enablement, it's possible. But equally, of course, you will have natural limitations, because obviously people join for certain aspects of a role, and that's what they've trained for in the first place. So that's where your more sort of direct entry type of schemes can help, if you need additional skill sets. And every service has got the debate between uniformed and non-uniformed. And
Yes.
if you're a non-uniform,
There's a couple of services have got non-uniformed, though. They've got a couple of green book
yeah,
chiefs or chief
but
executives,
they
haven't they?
always seen as, you're not part of that, you know,
Yeah, it was harder for
journey.
them. That's why Dawn went back and redid all the. She didn't have to. She went back and did the firefighter development
Yeah.
program, even though it was never really going to be particularly applicable for her. But it brought her some authenticity, which is a bit sad reflection of the culture that we even need to do
To
that.
some degree, yes. I mean, you obviously got to have the ability to lead, and what you will find very quickly is if you're good at leading, people will gradually start to follow you. I mean, I remember when I first arrived at the fire service college with lots of rolling eyes, and a lot of the average was, well, he won't last more than 6 months, because that was probably true for some of my predecessors. And
Okay.
here we are, just over 3 years now. And yes, you've got to establish your credibility, and that's true for any role. Whenever you come new into an organization, people will.
How do you do that though? Like how? And I'm not trying to ask you to
It's
open up
about
about private
engagement.
conversations in
No,
your
no, no.
organization, but how did you shift those
It's
people?
about engagement. It's listening to people. It's respecting people for what they do. It's learning from people, but also making sure to enable people. Removing some of the barriers that prevents them from doing their roles, and that's when you start building up the credibility and trust. But also,
Must have been colossally frustrating for you, though, because sometimes you will have known what needed to happen. The reason you've been brought in is because certain things do need to change, and there's some non-negotiables that you do need to get people on board
no,
with.
absolutely, but that's how you go about it. So you can package things up in a different way, and you can engage differently. And you
Okay.
got to make some difficult decisions. I mean, inevitably, you might have to move some people on, you may have to reorganize aspects, and refocus things, and also sometimes bring in new talent into the organization. So there's different ways and means how you can do that. But the engagement piece is absolutely the most important, and I think it's being approachable, the ability to engage. I spent most of my time at the college, in order to be visible. It's just because we're doing the podcast
Yeah.
today. It's easier to be in an environment which is
Mhm.
completely silent, and there's no danger of being
Yeah.
interrupted, which inevitably at the college you do get from time to time, which is great, which makes it an exciting job. Um, but
Mhm.
equally, in my other role in Capita Fire and Rescue, I do station visits all the time. More. I wish I could do more
Yeah.
than I'm doing. It's a time constraint,
Mhm.
obviously. But the ability to sit down with the front line, to listen about their challenges, is incredibly important, because the problem as a leader is sometimes you get filtered information. So if you purely rely
Of
on your
course.
chain of
Yeah.
command, you end up with incredibly heavily filtered information. So that you've got to go back to the shop floor and listen and
Because I
engage.
don't want it to look like I'm not dealing with the problem either, don't it? I don't want to have to tell you some stuff because it's like, "Arr,
Exactly.
I'm still trying to
Yeah.
deal with this, and that can bleed into a
Yeah.
year before, and you're like, well,
Exactly. And the other thing is you've got to be authentic. So I don't pretend to
yes.
be a firefighter ever. So when I go to the front line,
Hmm.
I don't have a fake uniform, or what some people might do. So, I'm a civilian, so to speak, and that's how I behave. And it's great, because it also allows me to ask some stupid questions. But equally, it takes away that.
I'm a firefighter and I ask stupid questions all the time, so don't worry about
It
that.
takes away that imposter thing, as well. So,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm privileged in Capita Fire and Rescue. I've got Alec Clark as a chief fire officer, highly experienced, very well respected, and he is
Hmm.
the professional leader, when it comes to, technical aspects of running a fire service. That's his expertise. And at the same time, it also means that I can ring fence people from having to worry about P&L this and P&L that, and all those sort of
Yes.
things. That's where I come in. I'm the.
That's a very good, almost strategic luxury. And I say it as a luxury because I think that's where a lot of other services will struggle because they struggle to ring fence things like that, where really certain people don't belong, certain people's ideas and input, whilst respected, is not. It's not their it's not their department. It's not. They
No,
don't know what
but
they're
it's
talking about.
important that people don't become too isolated or insulated, because that's how it traditionally has been. The finance person is the only one who deals with finance, type of thing. Everybody's got to understand what the ultimate purpose is, why we're here. So the ultimate purpose, the fire service college is, to give learners the best learning experience possible and making sure they leave with relevant skills and that add value to their employers. But in our case, it goes further than that. Is doing a service for society. It's almost a citizen's service that we are creating. So there is saving people's lives and all those sort of things, which of course fantastic motivational factors for doing something that we're doing. If you would just run a college based on PL, P&L, financial numbers or whatever, it'd probably be a very disheartening job, because it's incredibly difficult to run a place like the Fire Service
Yes.
College. It's a 320-acre site, incredibly expensive to maintain. A lot of the infrastructure, of course, was built in the 1970s and subsequently not really invested in. So we got to rectify a lot of these things. The last 2 years we spent a record amount of money improving the infrastructure.
I've seen it, but it looked expensive.
The problem,
it looks great, but it looked expensive.
The problem is a lot of that money went into leaking roofs and things like that. Things that should have been fixed in the 80s and 90s, weren't fixed. And then when Capita took over, and there were hardly any learners there, and you have no income. Again, how can you justify spending big amounts of money? So.
I was gonna say, when you sell something, and I'm rubbish at this, but when this business I've sold in the past, you either sell it as a going concern or you sell the assets, and you have to ask yourself, if you've got nobody coming and your assets are deteriorating, what am I buying here? I'm buying a massive piece of land, okay, but there's a lot of work to be done.
There is, absolutely, but I think that's also exciting, because what it allows you is to literally rebuild, and certainly I think we've had a good go at that over the last 3 years, and I think we're now starting to, of course, reap the benefits by the college being once again being very popular and very busy. We've had a situation last week where we had to buy in additional accommodation locally because we couldn't accommodate everybody on site. What a fantastic problem to have.
Wow.
It stretched the team, no doubt about it. But I keep reminding them, this is a really, really good problem to have, because if you've got plenty of spare capacity, that's a much worse position to be in. And I'm very grateful to the team, how they've responded to it and how flexible they have been in making it all happen. But this is a really, really good sign. But it also means that it creates opportunities for people as well, because if we're busy, that then opens up new opportunities as well. But yeah, so coming back to the original point, and I think we sort of digressed slightly from sort of the direct entry scheme and things like that. So I think for me, the ideal scenario is always a good combination of people coming through the ranks from within, but also bringing the odd person in from the sideline. And the same as what you want at every fire station is you want some very, very experienced firefighters, but you also want some young firefighters, because the two coming together is almost the perfect combination. Because the youngsters bring in a different dynamic, they're challenging things, they're more technology enabled and things like that. Whereas of course they also then benefit from the experience from people who've been around for a longer period of time, who've seen it, who've been to major incidents, and have taken all those learnings back, and of course have got the ability then to pass on sort of technical skills and things like that as well. So the same is in the college, the same is in every fire and rescue service, the same as in the military. It's a different world we're living in, and if we want to attract the best people, if we want to be the best high performing organizations, we got to look at that, and also we've got to bring in diversity. We've got to make sure, and this is not about quotas for me. I think maybe it's a controversial point I'm making now. I don't believe in quotas. I believe that we should provide naturally an environment where anybody feels comfortable. And certainly for me, diversity is incredibly important. If I look at my senior leadership team, I'm in the minority, and I think that's a good thing. If we look at our instructor community, unfortunately, it is very white male dominated, because of course we are recruiting from a limited pool. So Hence why we're working incredibly closely with organisations like Women in the Fire Service and so forth. How can we get more females into the fire service? How do we get more people from ethnic, diverse groups into the fire service in the first place? So then we can recruit from within that community the next generation of instructors and things like that. Equally about instructors, it was all about seniority in the old days. You get to a certain point, you're
Yeah.
now going to become an instructor. Um, that world has changed. So we tend now to recruit people at a much earlier stage in their firefighting careers. We're now, you know, recruiting people based on their ability to convey knowledge. Are they good instructors? Not are they, overly experienced. So they've got to have their experience. They've got to
Yeah.
understand, the technical aspects of the role, but they also got to be willing to get on the additional qualifications to be an instructor. And all of our instructors now have a teaching qualification. But we'll enable that as well. If you are a fantastic person with potential to become a good instructor, but you haven't got one, don't worry. We'll
Hmm.
work with you through that process. You join
Mm.
us, and we'll put you on a program, and you will end up with a teaching qualification. But it is critical that we
I
professionalize.
know a few of them down there
Um,
doing that. Very young lad, Matt Adams. I think he just came second in the British Firefight Challenge. He's just done his fire behaviour and something else with you. He works in a service nearby. Absolutely loves it.
Yeah, and I think that's so the environment we want to create, and again, with the associates pool that we have, so we've got permanently employed instructors, and then we've got a pool of about 140 people, all very experienced, working as a freelance, and so we've got an incredible array of talent, knowledge, experience, seniority, which is great because they all learn from each other, support each other. It creates a really sort of dynamic environment, which then, of course, basically means we've got a fantastic proposition to take forward to our customers and ultimately to the learners.
A lot of the people that have gone there have said, as well as trainers and associate instructors or associate tutors, I think they're referred to, the exposure they get to people from different organisations. This actually, perhaps a different direction I'd like to go now is we spoke a lot about the UK Fire and Rescue Services training there, but there really has been, in my limited interpretation, limited exposure, a real growth in the international work, the aviation, the oil and gas, the resilience training. Is there a lot more international training happening there, or is that just from my personal meetings of individuals? It seems to become more of an internationally attractive training
I
centre
mean,
as
the
well.
brand is recognized around the world. So, I mean, clearly we're
Yeah.
well positioned for that. I think for me, it's always important to have the right balance. There is a risk to become over reliant on international business, and I think during the more sort of difficult times of the college, that might have been the case, where we had, 200 students from a specific country, for example. I mean, that predates me, but, the strain it puts on the overarching environment. So I think we do have a good mix of international customers, and they enjoy the experience when they come to the fire service college. It's seen as worldwide, as a standard setter. We are accredited, not just in the UK but also in the US and other countries, so we can offer qualifications
Oh, really?
which are relevant to their systems, especially in sort of a lot of Caribbean countries have adopted US standards rather than UK standards, so it's important to have the right qualifications available so that they obviously are, suitable for their environments. But equally importantly, of course, is the diversity across, the national resilience and critical national infrastructure environments. So, whilst, as I said earlier on, probably about 80% of what we do is still very heavily fire and rescue service focused, we're working with police forces, ambulance services, organizations like National Highways, National Grid, utility companies for all sorts of activities. It could be courses that they're attending, but it could be also utilizing our 320 acres for their own purposes. So national highways, for example.
It is a gorgeous site. It's massive,
Absolutely. I
isn't
mean,
it?
this is the benefit. We've got a motorway, we've got a train set, we've got, all sorts
Mm.
of rigs. We can
Yeah.
simulate any sort of, incident that
Mm.
might possibly occur in the UK, if not worldwide. So, it gives.
I've seen that you're recently invested in some of your high-rise facilities as well. When I was down there recently, I see there's a lot of work going on with some of the high-rise fire behaviour
There
structures as
is
well. Seems to be some investment going on there.
absolutely. I mean, we are looking at quite an ambitious program to
Oh, really?
replace a lot of our training infrastructure over the next few years. So obviously there's a lot to be done, so it can't all happen in one
Mm.
go. But certainly looking how we can, particularly bring more technology into the training environment. So and the
Okay.
idea really is to make training as attractive and accessible as possible without losing the real touch. So the unique aspect of the fire service college is that ultimately you can always practice a near real life type of scenario, and that makes it unique in the
Yeah.
UK, unique worldwide, I would argue.
It's the best playground in the
It
UK
is.
for it, isn't it?
It is a fantastic playground, and allows us to simulate situations and put people through those situations in an almost near real life scenario. But equally at the same time, of course, is there are health and safety considerations, the environmental considerations nowadays, and that's where immersive learning technologies can help. So
I think that's where actually it's going to become more and more of a unique opportunity because I know you're really upgrading a lot of your, I mean, they were pretty good anyway, but the decontamination procedures and the protection for firefighters, because it is going to become one of the few sites in the UK eventually where people can do carbonaceous burns safely because you're nowhere near residential. You've got it set up, all the incident side is all one side of the fencing
it,
and there's a very clear separation
It,
between it all, isn't there?
it is, but we still have got an obligation both on the health and safety as well as on the
Yeah.
environmental side. So so we certainly will never ever burn just for the sake of burning, and I think
No, no.
and equally when you burn, you try to burn as cleanly as you possibly can, So. And I think that's important. That's the right thing to do. And also, of course, it prolongs, the life of the infrastructure, and again, it
Mm-hmm.
reduces the risk to individuals as well. But of course, what you can't do is make it too easy because then people will not be prepared for the real thing. So that's ultimately the goal is
That's the downside that's happening in a lot of places where they're just training with some synthetic smoke. Or I work with an organisation where I travel around the UK and accredit endpoint assessments for apprenticeships. And there's a huge spectrum of good to very poor training facilities, in my personal opinion, and the opinion of many others. And you just worry that I worry that we're setting people up to fail sometimes. Yeah, like we say, we're not looking for unwarranted, spontaneous exposure to unnecessary hazardous environments. But when it does come to that just initial acquisition of skills or that assessment criteria, you do want to be able to bring as much realism in a safe manner into the scenario as possible. Otherwise, I just feel you set people up for failure, and I think that's quite unique about the college and the resources that you have.
absolutely, and the assessment piece will always be in a real scenario. But in the early stages,
Mm.
getting people prepared, immersive technologies have a really important role to play. And so what you do is
Mm.
you ease them into it. And so by the time they get to the real burn, it will almost be second nature to them because they will
Mm.
have gone through the scenarios, they will have practiced them, and then gradually they got the first burn. Then they take the lessons learned from that first burn, again utilizing technology, 360 cameras, and all those are things where you
Mm.
can then go back into the classroom and you can go back into the scenario and actually say, have a look over your shoulder with your 3D goggles on. You look over your shoulder, oh, there's another
Mm.
exit. I didn't see that, and this is exit, which makes blends basically the practical training with the technology element, which makes it a unique place. So so the vision we've got is we can't just burn for the sake of burning. So we can't
No,
do
no, no.
that. Equally, we can't just put people into a classroom and then expect them to be competent as a result of that. So so there's it's a
Mm.
staged approach to it. And that works really, really well. And I think it's the ability to use technology to enhance learning rather than to almost replace learning, because not everything is a computer game. There's some real serious stuff out
No,
there.
of course.
But then if we look, for example,
Yeah.
into command and leadership, if you would want to stage some of those really complex scenarios in the real world, you would need hundreds of actors, equipment, and that simply is not feasible. It wouldn't be
No.
affordable, but also it's just practically not feasible. So utilizing technology there, makes a real difference. The beauty of what we've got is with technology is we can play parts of the scenario for real and then combine it with the technology. So you might have someone sitting in a control room, and they can have video links
Doing like a tabletop
exactly to a couple
exercise and
of
then
real.
one sector or one aspect. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly, which some of our competitors can't do. So it's either purely tabletop or I think that's where the big difference is. So that makes the Fire Service College unique, is that you can supplement, complement, whatever you want to call it, the two ways of doing it. So you get a good cross approach, which works really, really well. And that's where our large scale comes into play, because you've got a train set, you've got a ship, you've got an aircraft, you've got a residential building, you've got a commercial building, you've got an urban search and rescue
It's the best
facility.
playground
It
for
is
it in the
exactly. So
UK,
you
really.
can bring it all
The
together.
USAR rig doesn't actually get as much promotion as I would expect it to,
It's regained in popularity. So
because it's a big rig.
it's a great
good.
rig. It's
There's partial collapses, pancake collapses. There's a rope. You can do a lot. You can do most scenarios on it.
absolutely. And we got organisations like NARU, for example, a National Ambulance Resilience Unit, using it extensively. We've got USAR exercises there. We've got special forces, practicing
I think Heart teams train there as
hard as
well. I
well.
think I've seen them down there.
Absolutely.
I might be wrong. Yeah, they do, don't
And now we've got the evac stack element to it, so that you can practice evacuating high-rise buildings, and all those sort of things. So it's actually it's a valuable rig. I wish it would be more used for its original purpose. But there's obviously some history there, and many listeners will be familiar with the history. It all predates me, so I reserve the right not to comment on what
they?
might
Yeah.
or might not have happened and who made what decision. But it is a
Yeah.
great facility, and the problem is, of course, is
I think some people just need to get over some things as well, and they're my words, not yours. But like, we can point fingers at the people of the past, but they're gone now. So we're here. What do we want to do? Do we want to continually throw stones at each other from discussions and conversations gone past, or do we want to make the best of what we've got?
exactly, and that's what my view is. I'm looking to the future, and
Yeah.
and a lot of the services are doing the same as well. So the level of engagement is really, really positive. And as I said very early on when we started our conversation, is the key thing for me is that customer centricity. Moving away from the Fire Service College knows better. That might have been at some stage the perception out there, is to actually know we are a partner and we're in this together.
So in that partnership mindset, sorry, to have that customer focus in our heads, what are you hearing from, when you speak to the leaders of these organizations, when you're speaking to chief fire officers and other organizations as well, what are some of the big challenges coming over the hill for them? What concerns do they have, either that they are not equipped for, or they feel the UK Fire and Rescue Service is not? What are they asking? What are they asking the college to help with in terms of solutions, or just in terms of conversationally? What are their concerns?
So again, we alluded to leadership and management skills early on. That is a common theme. Cultural change management is a common theme as well. But also, of course, recruitment, i.e., attracting people into the fire service, and very importantly, retaining people in the fire service. Those are key aspects. It's very expensive to bring people in. It's very expensive to replace people. So that is clearly an element that always comes up. And of course, health and safety is a critical component around, okay, how do we avoid people getting injured, and the UK is is I wouldn't say is unique in that sense, but I think around the world there's a slightly different outlook, and I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. That's for others to judge. But and quite rightly, we are as concerned about a firefighter's life as it is about someone who needs rescuing or whatever might be the case in the incident. Whereas I think in other countries, it's the focus is much more on, I shall call them the victim or the people.
They seem to have a much higher risk
Yeah,
appetite. Certainly, when I look and speak with some of the American
yeah,
models and other European aspects, there is, and I don't think it's right or wrong, but like you say, there seems to be a higher acceptance that it's part of our job. We're entering these dangerous
yeah.
environments. We're going to take reasonable risk to save savable life and all that sort of jazz. But I also think, even historically, that's why people have come to the UK, because we tend to be a little bit better, I think, at procedures, at managing risk,
Exactly.
at command and decision making. But yes, that pendulum can swing, and it can, for someone such as yourself, act as a barrier to being able to do
No,
something.
I don't see it as a barrier. I think more from a customer perspective is helping our customers to enable them to operate in that
Okay.
sort of environment. So, and of course that's also part of our culture at the college. I mean, health and safety is number one, two, and three priority. There's no question about it. And that's looking after our own people, it's looking after learners, it's looking after visitors. And I mean, what keeps me awake at night is not, do I hit my numbers or not? I mean, that's whatever it is. I mean, I'm sure my bosses probably might have a different view on that, but is it?
But that's already been boxed
It,
off, as in that
it,
should already have been
it is
planned for.
exactly,
There's a strategic plan going towards that.
exactly.
It's the uncontrollables, the concerns at the lower level. If someone
Ab-
got hurt today on
a-
a course, they shouldn't have.
Absolutely, and this is, every time I engage with anybody, it's always, there's always that in the back of my mind. Okay, how can we make it a safer place? And we've got a lot of support. We've got a fantastic in-house health and safety team at the Fire Service College, who are constantly looking at every aspect of what we do. There's this health and safety culture instilled in everybody, but also is, of course, investing in facilities, equipment, PPE, for example. I mean, everybody at the college has got brand new PPE or workwear, whatever the roles are. It's all state of the art. It's fit for purpose, and things like that. In the old days, you could access the incident ground and you could walk around the college. Everything is now segregated. We've got systems in place, access control systems. So we've done a lot of work over the last 3 years around that. The building improvement programs equally contribute towards that. Providing a better, yes, it's a more pleasant environment and it's a more comfortable environment, but equally it's also a safer environment. And that's obviously very, very important. But yeah, so there's a whole spectrum of things that customers bring up in conversations quite regularly. And for us it's important that we listen, we engage, and then jointly develop solutions towards that. So this is not like the fire service college approach to doing things, or that is, let's say, the LFB approach to doing things. Is okay, how can we come up with a model that works for the sector as a whole? And that's where I think, having particularly subject matter experts as team leaders for all the specific departments who are highly experienced individuals, and that's where absolutely we're looking for senior, highly experienced firefighters, who've come through the ranks, who've got the experience and understanding, but people also who go above and beyond their technical skill set, so they are attending forums, are presenting to organizations, might be doing research on behalf of organizations to really, make sure that, their specific subject areas are absolutely cutting edge. So we are remodeling the firefighter development program completely at the moment, for example. That's a lot of work going on there, bringing in obviously the digital side of things, making it more modular as well, so that services got more flexibility in what aspects they want to emphasize more. Incident command and leadership is constantly evolving, with the latest learnings that be taken out from previous incidents, to make sure that that is all up to date. fire safety, as you know, the legislative framework keeps changing all the time. So we're
Massive
constantly,
focus on that at the
got
minute.
to
Yeah.
keep on top of that and make sure that our fire safety courses are fit for purpose. Our fire investigation courses is exactly the same. So it's making sure we respond to what our customers need, but also working with our customers to think about, okay, where might things go in the future?
I think the world of hazmat. I mean, Ed. I can't remember his last name. It escapes me now. We came down and did a podcast with Ed, the lead of one of your hazmat courses, and head of the Environment Agency, whose name escapes me as well. I'm terrible with names. Fascinating individuals, and I didn't realise they were doing courses down there with the Environment Agency. I find that every time I seem to turn a corner, I'm met with some subject matter expert from a totally different sector I didn't expect to find.
Oh, and I mean that's the fascinating thing about the fire service colleges. It's you always explore new things, and that's, I think, it's coming back to my earlier point about it's not just about fire any longer. It is about the more holistic national resilience and grid national infrastructure agenda as well. So because it all comes together, everything's interlinked. I mean, if we look at environmental factors, wildfires is a very good example. How climate change,
Yeah.
how we manage the environment, how we respond to wildfires. It all comes together. And we can't work in isolation. All the problems we face, as humankind, is all interlinked. If you've got a major, terrorist incident.
I'm sure you have got someone working on it, but I'd love to think that there's some wildfire specialists looking to come in. We just had an episode go live in a week or so with 2 wildfire experts. One that's running the work in Wales to help them upgrade all of theirs. He's got them all brand new PPE and their systems. And then Rob, another individual from Lancashire, I think he is, head of NFCC wildfire stuff. Fascinating. And a lot of these people are coming to retirement or are looking for different opportunities and options and stuff like that. And again, you've just got a great playground for it. I can just think of the training and scenarios that could be set up for wildfire training.
Absolutely. And we've got people come from overseas as well. We've got people actually on a wildfire course as we speak. So, and equally is, of course, electric vehicles, how to deal with battery fires. That's a big program we're working on.
I know you've been doing a lot of research there as well. Your rigs have been set up there to do testing and support some of the, I think Paul Christensen, we had him on the podcast, he's come and done some testing on site and you've facilitated some of the research that he's been part of.
They have, and also our friends in the FPA, they're doing trials on building claddings, for example, and things like that. So, and for me, that's really important that, we do have a thought leadership element to the college as well, because that probably has sort of disappeared over the last decade or so, where it's been much more on technical training delivery. And I think now it's getting a seat back around the table. And it was quite difficult because sometimes we're being looked down on as, oh, well, they're a commercial provider. It's all about them making a profit. And I always keep saying is look, yes, we are a commercial organization. Yes, I've got to make the numbers work, but we're still at the heart of the fire service. We're still, share the same goals and interests.
And also, with the greatest of respect, a lot of services in the UK haven't got the capacity to do this themselves anyway, or the knowledge base sometimes. They might have some amazing person, but they're stuck in a role over there in ops assurance or fire investigation. They can't put together a modular system on leadership and development for themselves because they have faced their own budgetary constraints. So why not reach out to individuals where these specialists are?
Exactly. And we do some work which is non-commercial, where we are de facto donating time and resources to work on certain activities, because we see there's a wider benefit to the sector and ultimately ourselves as well. So I think the notion of, well, we're purely a commercial organization, that is absolutely not the case. And the same as, whenever there is call outs, fire aid when it comes to Ukraine and everything else, of course, we're happy to support and engage. And also doing, sponsorship and support of various events and at the college, which we don't make any money on whatsoever, but where we see, does contribute to the wider debate and an advancement of the sector. And I think that's really, really important. And, when we do encourage, collaboration, partnerships, wherever we can, whether it's within the fire sector or any other aspect of national resilience. Very keen to do so.
So before we close, Dominik, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about, because I've attended quite a few events at the college. I think I'm going to the HOT event in a couple of weeks, and then there's another National BA Challenge. Could you expand a little bit? Because obviously, predominantly we've been talking about training and development here. We've referenced research a little bit. There are a great number of events that happen at the college as well. And I wonder if you could give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what they are and why you do
No,
that.
absolutely. So, obviously, we've got this massive site, 320 acres in Moreton-in-Marsh, with some very unique facilities, which are very attractive to a multitude of organisations, ranging from film studios. So, we had all the big studios doing filming work, ranging from the BBC all the way up to Netflix and Amazon. Converting
No way. I've never seen them on site. Oh, I bet it's closed off.
It is, and it's quite
because
fascinating the amount of
place.
equipment they bring along. So, once our motorway was converted into an American highway, so with Jersey barriers, the whole lot, the markings, everything. So it was like a 2-second scene in some Amazon production for which they spent 2 days filming. But that's fascinating. But it's also, of course, is organisations like NILO, for example, who come regularly on site. It's armed response units from various police forces use the site. The old Commandant's House is often used as a truck den for training purposes, I hasten to add.
Yeah, of course. Not for a side hustle.
Exactly. The armed forces are regular visitors for all sorts of training activities. But also, charitable organisations come to us. Various government agencies take advantage of it. But also, of course, we've got a big conference type of business where organisations hire meeting rooms from within the sector, but also from outside the sector. So it's a good spread of different organisations that come on site.
Well, it's based in the Cotswolds as well. It's a wonderful place to visit, to go and have a meeting, have a great lunch.
Well, there's accommodation at some selective weekends on booking.com, especially during the summer months. So if you want to stay at a good standard accommodation with access to swimming pool and gym and various other welfare facilities, there's a much more cost effective.
I didn't know people could book that as well.
No, wow, it's obviously never to interfere with our core mission. But what it does is the events business enables us to generate additional revenue, which we can then reinvest in the core business. So it helps to contribute, paying for the infrastructure, maintaining the infrastructure, and therefore that's very valuable. And of course, we do things like team building exercises. And so forth as well. So it's a really fascinating hub, really. For all sorts of activities, but also for the community. So the gym is open to local membership. We're the only large-scale gym in the vicinity. Swimming pool, local schools are coming for that.
Yeah, I've seen when I'm down there. There's some children's swimming clubs that run from there,
local
and
primary
other health
school,
clubs, and
other schools using us. The local football club uses our pitch from time to time. So we're part of the community, and that's very important to us. Most of the people who work at the college live in the community. Of course, we're a major economic factor in the community. We're the biggest employer in the district. So, and of course, local communities, they are neighbours, so we've got to be responsible, a responsible neighbour to them.
Can't upset the neighbours,
No,
Dominik.
absolutely not. So, and I think also the community engagement piece is very important. So we've got fireworks night back this year, which we had to stop during COVID, obviously, and things like that. So, I'm really pleased where we are at the moment. I think we've come a long way, and that's due to the hard work of all the employees of the Fire Service College, but also, of course, the trust and the confidence that customers, have given back to us, which may have sort of disappeared for whatever reasons, and it is good to, be seen as a partner. And as a centre of excellence once again. So very grateful to that, and equally, obviously, it's always good to see all those learners who come through the college, of course, starting very successful careers in their respective professions. good to engage with them down the line. So now, having been there over just 3 years, I do now start seeing some people coming back. But also when I go out and about to visit customer organizations, it's actually quite nice to bump into people, who have been recently through the Fire Service College.
The vast majority of people have really, really positive experiences there. And I think most people, like you say, if people that have been in 10 or 15 years, I know a lot of people are retiring now, they all have been there at some point in time. And they always say to everybody else, or they always say to the recruits, because I run a lot of recruits courses now, have you been to the college yet? That's usually one of the first questions that people ask, because it is also such a great networking place as well. You meet people from all over the country, but certainly sometimes all over the world. You make those connections, sometimes for life. Oh yeah, I met so-and-so down at the college. They were training with, Warwickshire, Derbyshire, Manchester, London, whoever they were training with, and then you see them again. You go back for your instructor's course or requalification or an event like Women in the Fire Service. And it's, I want it to remain that, because I'm a little bit romantic about it, I must admit, but I also just think if the things that have happened in the last 3 to 5 years hadn't have happened and we had have lost it, you'd never have got it back.
Oh, it would be housing.
You'd never
it will
get
be
it back.
housing development very quickly. That's the reality. It's an incredibly expensive site to run, and there is absolutely an interdependency between all the stakeholders. So,
but I think that's what the important shift has been, as you've started to turn that tide and look back at, as you've alluded to here, we're part of the same team. What do you need from us? If you had a bad experience in the past, what's the development? What's the change that needs to be made? That receptiveness to, without seeming too tongue-in-cheek, be the eternal student as you instruct the students, you teach and grow the students to remain the student yourself and say to people, what is it you need? What challenges are you facing as the leadership teams in these organizations? And my sincere hope and belief is that will now continue. I think that's like a turning tide as we see this changing of the guard. There are more people in the services now that have had very positive experiences with the college versus 10, 15 years ago, perhaps. And I only see that perpetuating, I think.
Yeah, and I hope so as well, and if not, then I will be very, very disappointed. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to the future. I'm not going anywhere, so I'm enjoying the journey.
Good man.
It's incredibly hard work, but as I said, with the right team, with the right support and the right engagement from customers and learners alike, it's absolutely fascinating. And I wake up every morning looking forward to what challenges that day brings. And every Friday evening, if I can escape, because sometimes there's obviously weekend events and things like that, it's nice to reflect on a busy but very successful week.
Well, like we said, I think a lot of the heavy lifting, not all, but a lot of the heavy lifting has been done. And now, to coin a phrase, we've got the right people on the bus, all the wheels are on the bus. And now it seems like it's starting to really build momentum. Now a lot of that big heavy lifting and change has been done. I want to be really respectful of your time, but thank you so much for coming on with us there, Dominik. I really, really appreciate it. It's a real humbling compliment for us as well, because I've been to the college many times. I've wanted to bring this to an audience that is perhaps different from the standard audience that people perhaps engage with, because like everything else, communication is evolving, and I didn't expect to get you. So it's very, and I know we're all normal people and no one's more important than anybody else, but your time is very precious and you've donated nearly 2 hours of it to me today. So I want to thank you very much.
No, Pete, my pleasure. I really enjoyed that as well. So thank you.
The Firefighters Podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, and please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're around the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.